I never thought I'd find myself standing alone in the rain outside a luxury resort, watching my husband drive away with his family while trying to hold back tears. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Emma Chin, and this is the story of how my mother-in-law's cruelty led to the most unexpected revelation of my life. Growing up, I learned early that money didn't define a person's worth. My parents owned a small bookstore in a quiet neighborhood of Boston. We weren't rich, but we were happy. They taught me the value of education, hard work, and most importantly, treating everyone with kindness regardless of their status. Those lessons would prove invaluable later in my life, though not in the way I expected. I met James Mitchell during my final year of college. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed different from the entitled rich kids who populated our prestigious university. While I was there on a scholarship, working part-time at the campus library, James came from old money, something I didn't realize until much later. Our romance was like a whirlwind. Coffee dates turned into long walks around campus, study sessions became dinner dates, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. James never made me feel less than him despite our different backgrounds. In fact, he seemed to admire my work ethic and independence. "You're not like other girls, Emma," he would say, his blue eyes twinkling. "You see the world differently." The first crack in our perfect romance appeared when it was time to meet his family. I'll never forget that first dinner at the Mitchell mansion. The moment I walked through those imposing double doors, I felt like I'd entered another world. Victoria Mitchell, my future mother-in-law, stood at the top of the grand staircase like a queen surveying her kingdom. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer dress screamed old money. But it was her eyes that made me shiver. Cold and calculating, they seemed to strip away my carefully chosen outfit and see the bookstore owner's daughter underneath. "So," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "this is the scholarship student James has been spending time with." That night set the tone for our entire relationship. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I was never good enough in Victoria's eyes. When James proposed 6 months later, her disapproval became even more apparent. "Really, James," I overheard her saying one day, "there are so many suitable girls from good families. What will people say?" But James stood firm, and we got married in a beautiful ceremony. Though Victoria managed to make her disappointment known in every detail she controlled. "At least let me plan the wedding," she had insisted. "We need to make it presentable." The years that followed were a delicate balance. James's work as a corporate lawyer kept him busy, and I threw myself into building my own career, working my way up from junior editor to senior editor at a prestigious publishing house. Victoria took every opportunity to remind me that I didn't belong in their world. Which brings me to last week, when James announced we'd been invited to join the annual Mitchell family vacation at the prestigious Aurora Grand Resort and Spa in the Berkshires. "It'll be different this time," James promised, seeing my hesitation. "Mom's been better lately, and it's a chance for everyone to bond." I wanted to believe him, I really did. So I packed my bags, took time off work, and tried to stay positive. The resort was everything you'd expect from a place where rooms cost more per night than some people's monthly rent. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and staff who seemed to materialize out of thin air to cater to every whim. Victoria had booked several luxury suites for the family, herself and James's father Richard, James's sister Patricia and her husband, and one for us. The first day actually went surprisingly well. We had a family dinner in one of the resort's exclusive restaurants, and Victoria even complimented my dress. Though she couldn't resist adding, "It's amazing what they can do with department store fashion these days." The real trouble started the next morning. I was sitting by the pool, reading a manuscript for work, when I overheard Victoria and Patricia talking at the nearby cabana. "Did you see what she's wearing?" Patricia's voice carried clearly across the space. "That swimsuit looks like it's from Target." Victoria's reply made my blood run cold. "Don't worry, dear. I have a plan to fix this embarrassment once and for all." I should have known then that something was coming, but I didn't expect it to happen at dinner that night. Victoria had arranged for us to eat at Les Ciel, the resort's most exclusive restaurant. As we were being seated, she made a show of looking at my outfit, a simple but elegant black dress. "Oh dear," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I'm so sorry, Emma. But this restaurant has a strict dress code, designer attire only. Perhaps you could eat in the casual dining room instead." I felt my face flush as heads turned toward our table. My dress is perfectly appropriate, I said quietly, trying to maintain my dignity. Victoria's eyes gleamed with malice. James, darling, surely you see that Emma is out of her element here. This is a family tradition, and some people simply don't understand our standards. I looked at James, waiting for him to defend me. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking between me and his mother. Maybe Mom has a point, Emma. We don't want to make a scene. His words hit me like a physical blow. 5 years of marriage, and he still couldn't stand up to his mother. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking. I see, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, I wouldn't want to embarrass anyone with my presence. Victoria smiled triumphantly. Perfect. James, why don't you help Emma pack her things? She can take a cab back to the city. We'll enjoy the rest of our family vacation properly. I waited for anyone, to object. Patricia smirked. Her husband suddenly became very interested in his menu, and Richard, my father-in-law, just sighed and looked away. As for James, he just sat there, avoiding my eyes. That's how I found myself standing in the rain outside the resort, watching James drive away after helping me with my bags. He had mumbled something about calling me later, about how I should understand that family traditions were important, about how maybe next year would be better. I was about to call for a cab when a sleek black car pulled up, and a distinguished-looking man in his 60s stepped out, holding an umbrella. Miss Chen, he said, looking concerned. I'm Robert Sterling, the owner of Aurora Grand. Would you mind joining me for a conversation in my office? There seems to be a situation we need to discuss. Little did I know that conversation would change everything. As I followed Robert Sterling through the grand lobby, I couldn't help but notice how the staff's demeanor changed when they saw him. Their polite smiles transformed into genuine respect, and several even bowed slightly as we passed. Despite my emotional turmoil, I found myself curious about why the owner of such a prestigious resort would take an interest in my situation. His office was exactly what you'd expect from someone of his position. Elegant mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains, and walls lined with awards and photographs. But what caught my eye was a familiar face in one of the largest photos. My grandfather, Jonathan Chen, standing next to a younger Robert Sterling. Please have a seat, Miss Chen, Robert said kindly, gesturing to a plush leather chair. Or should I say, Ms. Jonathan Chen's granddaughter. I sat down slowly, my mind racing. You knew my grandfather. Robert's eyes softened with what looked like nostalgia. Knew him? Emma, your grandfather was my mentor and closest friend for over 30 years. He was also the original investor in Aurora Grand Resort. My hands began to shake as the implications of his words sank in. Grandfather had passed away 2 years ago, leaving behind a letter that I hadn't been able to bring myself to open yet. His last words to me had been cryptic. When the time is right, you'll understand your legacy. Robert reached into his desk and pulled out a thick folder. I've been waiting for you to visit, Emma. Your grandfather made me promise to explain everything when the moment was right. And after witnessing Mrs. Mitchell's behavior tonight, I believe that time has come. He opened the folder and began laying out documents. Your grandfather didn't just invest in Aurora Grand, he was the majority shareholder. When he passed away, his entire 60% ownership of the resort chain transferred to you. The room seemed to spin. That's impossible. I would have known. Jonathan was very specific about keeping this quiet until you were ready. Robert explained. He wanted you to build your own life, develop your own strength of character without the influence of wealth. And from what I've observed, you've done exactly that. Tears welled up in my eyes as I thought about my grandfather, how he'd always encouraged me to work hard, to stay humble, to judge people by their actions rather than their bank accounts. Even when I was struggling with student loans, he'd insisted I find my own way. There's more, Robert continued, his expression turning serious. The Aurora Grand isn't just one resort. We're a chain of luxury properties across the globe with a current market value of over $3.2 billion. As majority shareholder, you're effectively the owner of the entire enterprise. I sat there in stunned silence, my mother-in-law's cruel words echoing in my mind. All those years of subtle jabs, of being treated like I was beneath them. And I'd been worth more than the entire Mitchell family combined. Why tell me now? I managed to ask. Robert's face hardened slightly. Because I've watched Mrs. Mitchell humiliate you in my resort, your resort, and I cannot stand by any longer. Your grandfather built this place on the principles of treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their perceived status. What happened tonight goes against everything we stand for. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Robert's assistant entered, looking concerned. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Mitchell is demanding to speak with you. She's quite insistent. Robert looked at me questioningly. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and nodded. Show her in. Victoria Mitchell burst into the office like a storm cloud, her designer dress slightly disheveled from her haste. Mr. Sterling, I demand to know why my son's wife is in your office instead of leaving the premises as requested. We have been loyal patrons of Aurora Grand for decades, and I won't have our family vacation ruined by. She stopped abruptly as Robert stood up, his expression stern. Mrs. Mitchell, I believe it's time you understood exactly who you've been speaking to. Allow me to introduce Emma Chen Mitchell, majority owner of Aurora Grand Resorts International. Victoria's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: disbelief, shock, horror, and finally a sickly attempt at a smile. There must be some mistake. No mistake, I said quietly, finding my voice. Though I'm curious, does the dress code at Les Seal still apply to the owner? Victoria sank into a chair, her legs seemingly unable to hold her up. But you're just an editor. James said your family owned a bookstore. They do, I confirmed. And I'm proud of that bookstore and everything my parents taught me about hard work and kindness. Something you might want to learn about, Victoria. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Mom says there's some kind of situation. Where are you? What's going on? I showed the message to Robert, who smiled knowingly. Shall we move this conversation to the presidential suite? I believe we have some family matters to discuss. 20 minutes later, I stood in the largest suite I'd ever seen, looking out over the moonlit mountains. Behind me, the Mitchell family filed in one by one: James, Patricia, their father Richard, and a very pale Victoria. James rushed to me, his face a mix of confusion and concern. Emma, what's going on? Mom's not making any sense. I turned to face them all, feeling stronger than I ever had. Let me tell you a story about my grandfather, Jonathan Chen, and the legacy he built. The next hour was one I'll never forget. I watched as the mighty Mitchell family's world turned upside down. James sat in shocked silence as Robert explained the extent of my ownership. Patricia's smirk disappeared entirely when she learned that her favorite vacation spots in Aspen and the Maldives were also part of my portfolio. Richard, interestingly, just nodded as if something finally made sense. But it was Victoria's reaction that truly surprised me. As the truth sank in, she didn't rage or try to backpedal. Instead, she did something I'd never seen before. She cried. All these years, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. All these years I've been treating you like I was beneath you. I finished for her. Like I wasn't good enough for your son, your family, or your precious social circle. James finally found his voice. Emma, I don't know what to say. Why didn't you tell me? I turned to him, feeling a strange mix of love and disappointment. I didn't know until tonight. But would it have made a difference, James? Would you have stood up to your mother if you'd known I was wealthy? Because if money is what it takes to earn respect in this family, then we have bigger problems than I thought. The room fell silent as my words hung in the air. Even Victoria stopped crying, looking at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. Robert cleared his throat. I'll leave you to discuss this as a family. Emma, we can meet tomorrow to go over the details of your position on the board. As he headed toward the door, he paused and turned back. Oh, and Mrs. Mitchell. The dress code at Les Seal has always been elegant attire. We've never had a designer-only policy. We don't believe in discriminating based on labels, something your daughter-in-law's grandfather insisted upon when he founded this resort. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with the Mitchells and the weight of everything that had just been revealed. What happened next would either break this family apart forever or force us to rebuild on a foundation of genuine respect and understanding. Looking at their shocked faces, I realized the true value of my grandfather's legacy wasn't in the billions of dollars or the luxury resorts. It was in the lesson he'd wanted me to learn and now teach. True worth isn't found in a bank account or a designer label. but in how you treat others when you think they have nothing to offer you. The real question was, were the Mitchells ready to learn this lesson? The silence in the presidential suite stretched on for what felt like hours. James was the first to break it, running his hands through his hair, a nervous habit I come to recognize over our years together. "I've been such a fool," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "All these years watching Mom treat you like this, and I let it happen." Victoria stood up suddenly, smoothing her designer dress with trembling hands. "I should go. Clearly, I've made quite enough of a mess tonight." "Sit down, Mother," James said with unexpected firmness. For the first time in our marriage, I heard him speak to her without that underlying note of deference. "We're going to have this conversation as a family. All of it." Victoria sank back into her chair, looking smaller somehow without her usual air of superiority. Patricia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "So all this time, while we were judging you, looking down on you," she laughed, but it wasn't her usual mocking laugh. "God, we must have looked so ridiculous to you." "I didn't know," I reminded her, "about any of this. And that's the point, isn't it? You treated me badly because you thought I was poor. Would it have been okay if I actually was?" Richard, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "No," he said simply. "No, it wouldn't have been." He turned to Victoria, and for the first time, I saw real anger in his eyes. "This has gone on long enough, Victoria. What you did tonight, what you've been doing for years, it stops now." Victoria looked at her husband in shock. "Richard, I let this happen too," he continued. "I stood by and watched you torture our daughter-in-law because, what? She didn't come from money, because her parents own a bookstore instead of a hedge fund." He stood up and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. "My father was a janitor, Victoria, or have you forgotten that?" The room fell silent again. I'd never known this about Richard. It had never come up in all our family gatherings. Victoria's face went pale. That's different," she stammered. "How?" Richard turned back to face her. "How is it different?" "I worked my way up, built our fortune from nothing, just like Emma's grandfather did. But somewhere along the way, you forgot what it means to value people for who they are, not what they own." James moved to sit beside me on the plush sofa, taking my hand in his. "Emma, I know saying sorry isn't enough. I failed you as a husband. I was so caught up in trying to please Mom, in maintaining family harmony, that I forgot my first duty was to you." I squeezed his hand, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "You did fail me, James. Every time you stayed silent, every time you told me to just ignore it or keep the peace. It hurt. It hurt so much." Victoria made a small sound, almost like a sob. "I did that. I made my own son hurt his wife because of your prejudice. I finished for her. Your need to feel superior. Your belief that money and status are what make a person worthy of respect." Standing up, I walked over to where Victoria sat and knelt in front of her chair, looking into her eyes. "Do you know what my grandfather taught me, Victoria? He taught me that true class isn't about how much money you have or what brands you wear. It's about how you treat people, especially people you think can't do anything for you." Victoria's carefully made-up face crumpled. "How can you even look at me right now, after everything I've done?" "Because I choose to be better than what you taught your children," I said quietly. "Because holding on to hate only hurts me in the end." Patricia stood up abruptly. "I need to apologize too. I followed Mom's lead, treated you horribly, and for what? Because it made me feel important. God, I've been awful." The night stretched on as we talked, really talked, for the first time in 5 years. There were tears, confessions, and painful truths laid bare. Richard shared stories about his humble beginnings, about falling in love with Victoria when she was a debutante and he was just a young man with big dreams. James talked about his shame at never standing up for me, his fear of disrupting the family dynamic. As dawn began to paint the sky in soft pinks and golds, Robert Sterling returned to the suite with breakfast and a stack of documents. "I hope you don't mind," he said, smiling warmly, "but I thought we might want to discuss the future over some food." Over croissants and coffee, Robert explained more about my grandfather's legacy. The Aurora Grand wasn't just a chain of luxury resorts. It was built on a foundation of ethical business practices, employee welfare, and community support. "Your grandfather believed that luxury shouldn't come at the cost of humanity," Robert explained. Every resort has a program to support local communities. We hire locally, provide education and training, and ensure that our success lifts up everyone around us. Victoria listened intently, and I saw something change in her expression. I would like to learn more about these programs, she said softly. Perhaps I could help. It wasn't a complete transformation. Those take time and real effort, but it was a start. In the weeks that followed, many things changed. James and I went through counseling, working to rebuild our marriage on a stronger foundation. He started standing up to his mother more, finding his own voice. Victoria, to everyone's surprise, began volunteering at a local women's shelter, teaching business skills to survivors of domestic violence. Patricia approached me one day with an idea for a literacy program at the resorts inspired by my parents' bookstore. Maybe we could have little libraries in each resort, she suggested, filled with books from independent bookstores around the world. Richard took a more active role in mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, sharing his story of rising from poverty to success. As for me, I took my place on the board of Aurora Grand Resorts International, but I also kept my job as an editor. I loved my work, and now I had the platform to help other voices be heard. My grandfather's letter, when I finally opened it, contained just a few lines. My dearest Emma, true wealth isn't in what you own, but in what you give to others. You've always been rich in the ways that matter most. Now use this legacy to help others understand that truth. Love, Grandfather. 1 year later, we gathered again at the Aurora Grand for another family vacation. This time, Victoria insisted on inviting my parents too. Watching my mother teach Victoria how to make her famous apple pie in a sweets kitchen, while my father and Richard discussed books by the fireplace, I felt tears of joy spring to my eyes. James came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. What are you thinking about? I leaned back against him, smiling. About how sometimes the greatest inheritances aren't the ones you can count in dollars. Your grandfather was a wise man, James said softly. He was, I agreed. And you know what the best part is? His legacy isn't just about the money or the resorts. It's about the lesson he taught us all, that true worth comes from how you treat others, not from what you own. Looking around at my transformed family, still imperfect, still learning, but trying to be better, I knew that this was the real treasure my grandfather had left me. The power to change hearts and minds, to help others see that dignity and respect should never depend on the size of someone's bank account. And that, more than any amount of money, was worth everything.